Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sackur. Is there a new brand of violent extremism that is identifiably different from the forms of militancy we've seen before? The question's prompted by the shocking and self-publicized brutality of the group calling itself Islamic State. Boko Haram in Nigeria deserves mention in the same breath. These groups provoke worldwide revulsion. But is force the only possible response? Well, my guest today is Giandomenico Pico, the former UN envoy who risked his life to negotiate the release of Western hostages in Lebanon. Is dialogue possible with today's jihadis? Giandomenico Pico, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
I want you to make a direct comparison, if you would. You were heavily involved dealing with militant groups in the Middle East, particularly Lebanon, in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Now, as an observer, you see what Islamic State is doing in the Middle East today. Are you more struck by the parallels or by the differences?
Oh, the differences.
Because?
Well, because not only every situation in our life, in the life of countries, is different from the previous one, you know, history goes on, but also because my involvement with the case of the Western hostages in Lebanon has its roots in my involvement in dealing with the Iran-Iraq war, which indeed had come to an end thanks to involvement of different people, but I was deeply involved, as you some probably know.
Well, I do know that you spend a lot of time negotiating with people at the very top in Iran, including Rafsanjani at the time. And are you saying that was a way into making contact with Hezbollah?
Yes, the Iranians knew me quite well during the Iran-Iraq war, and that is an important component. If you know someone and they know you, you have a different level than if you just pop in as an official from an organization somewhere and try to use the theory of your position, which is a theory, nothing else, in any given situation.
Let me take you, if I may, into the time you decided to commit yourself to a negotiated effort to get the Western hostages out of Lebanon.
Yes.
You knew you were going to have to deal with a group who regarded Westerners as fair game. So I come back to this question.
Yes.
How could you have any assurance that you yourself wouldn't become a target?
First, I went to Beirut from the east, not from the west. And I went to Beirut after I made a deal with President Rafsanjani that I would give something if he helped me in Beirut. And what I said I would give, I would basically make sure that the international community, in that particular case, my boss and myself, would publish a document which would say the truth, namely that Saddam had attacked Iran in 1979.
Right, so there was a quid pro quo. You gave him a diplomatic prize, and he gave you what? Guarantees that Hezbollah would accept you as a sort of neutral third party. They would talk to you and they would be open to a dialogue with you.
No, don't use the word with me, neutral. I don't believe it exists. But when I went to Beirut, did I have assurances? No, I had a psychological assurance that the president of Iran was supporting me. But when I got to Beirut, I thought I would be receiving as a present the freedom of all the hostages. Instead, I got to Beirut, and within a day and a half, I've been told there will be some inconveniences, plural, some inconveniences. The inconvenience was I had to accept to be taken away, blindfolded at night, and taken away in places I never knew where they were, and negotiate directly with the leadership of Hezbollah.
In the boot of a car?
Well, the boot of the car was the first step. Then I was put in the bag. Then I was blindfolded. Then I was taken to places unknown to me to this day. And in front of me, when my bag was taken out of my head, I would have in front of me two individuals fully masked who began the negotiation with me. And I said, I negotiated with Iran. And they said to me, that is Iran. We are Lebanese.
And I guess this is the crux of the matter. This is why your experience then resonates today. Did you look at these individuals, these hostage takers of Westerners, and did you look for signs that they could be trusted? What were you trying to achieve when you sat down with them?
Well, I went inside there, and the first point for me was I made a deal with your, so to speak, with your leaders in Iran, and most of all, I accepted your condition to be taken away, so you owe me something as a human being. And at that point, my request to him was that I'd shown already a credibility and a human honesty, so to speak, that he had not. And was stunning, the first comment made by this masked man, whom later on Israeli intelligence year later told me who he was. Had I known earlier, it would have been worse, because it was not exactly a gentleman and a scholar.
You mean you were told later that this man that you were dealing with, I think he took the name Abdullah, was actually Imad Munir,
Indeed.
Who is regarded as the sort of military chief of operations of
Indeed,
Hezbollah.
And the second most wanted terrorist by the US government, with 10 million on his head.
And a man described in Israel, and I suppose by many Western security agencies, as an out-and-out terrorist.
Indeed. And, and the first thing he said to me was, I know that taking innocent people from the streets is wrong, because if I would not know that, I would imply that my mother had not taught me how to live. So I know that it's wrong. But my point, he said, Mr. P, is I have no other weapons.
Right, so you are, in a sense, painting a picture to me of you sitting down with this man, widely seen in the Western world as one of the most wanted terrorists, and you're describing how you forged some sort of connection with him, a human connection, which led to a dialogue. And you're also suggesting to me that you could understand him, maybe empathize with him. Is that what you were trying to do?
No, I did not want to empathize with him. I could not empathize with him. My point with him was, I have gone very far. I accepted to be taken. So what do you do? I've not come here to negotiate. I accepted to be taken physically, and I'm here in a situation that is rather different from any other. So I've done my job. What do you do?
But see, this is a very human relationship. You know, you've told this story before, and I want to pick away at it a little bit, of how when you got further down this track of the relationship and delivering the freedom of some of the hostages, there was one time you were actually on the verge with the Hezbollah activists of delivering an American to freedom, releasing him. And you were the agent of his release, and you were in the car before the release was done.
Yes.
And the militant,
yes,
who was clearly very nervous,
yes,
held your hand.
Yes.
And you held his hand.
Yes.
Which suggests to me that you are building some sort of very real human connection. One might even say sympathy with these people.
No, no human connection, yes. On the clear understanding, what you've done is wrong. I'm here to help you readdress what was wrong. I don't take your position, but I have enough different approach to life that I've accepted to risk my life, not for you to take more lives, but for you to free lives.
Let's bring that, we don't have so much time, so let's now bring your experience to the table today.
Right.
Because right now, so-called Islamic State is holding more Westerners, some they've already murdered, but they still hold others.
Indeed.
And there is a very live debate about whether there is any possibility of opening a channel of communication, engaging, having a dialogue with these extremists. What is your view?
My view is that there is no situation of this nature in the world which can be compared. So there is no connection between what ISIS is doing to their hostages and what happened 30 years ago with Hezbollah. The situation is totally different. There is no comparison whatsoever. We are talking about different realities, and any comparison is misleading.
So when you described to me how you opened up a human connection with the Hezbollah militants, are you suggesting to me, from what you've seen of Islamic State, their ideology, their commitment to brutality, that it is impossible to imagine opening up some sort of connection to them? I
first made an agreement with Rafsanjani in Tehran, and only then I went to Beirut. So there was something.
So there was a diplomatic leverage at work.
Well,
and are you suggesting that it's impossible to imagine that with Islamic State?
The question is, who is the Rafsanjani of ISIS today? Rafsanjani and Iran for Hezbollah were understood and clear connection.
Well, we know that Islamic State is getting substantial funds. We believe a lot of them coming from the Gulf, where it may be from individuals in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar. We know that they get supply lines through Turkey. It seems there may be points of leverage and influence along the money trail and the logistics trail.
Yes.
Would you pursue those?
Yes, I would.
And if those points of leverage led you to some sort of indication, commitment that you could meet some of these people inside Islamic State itself, would you?
Probably not, because my relationship during the 80s with Iran, related to the Iran-Iraq war, had given me a tool in my hand, which was a tool with the Iranians, not of impartiality, but of credibility. As I told you, I do not believe in impartiality. It's an illusion of those who never done negotiations. And so it is a different case, but it is also important to know that we do not know exactly who is the Iran for ISIS as Iran was for Hezbollah.
I understand that. You're saying that right now, practically speaking, there isn't that point of entry that offers
Correct.
any sort of access
Correct.
to them. But there's a broader, maybe more philosophical point at work as well. You know, I think the world has been shocked by the way in which Islamic State has exercised its brutal power. You know, we've seen mass killings of women and children as well as men. We've seen the kidnappings, we've seen the beheadings, and we've seen the way they've used social networks to propagate their violence. This is what Barack Obama has said. There can be no reasoning, he says, no negotiation with this brand of evil. The only language understood by killers like these is the language of force. With all of your experience, do you agree with Obama's words?
I would go to the Gulf and find out if in the Gulf there is a country, a leader, who understands that what's happening with ISIS is a new chapter in the history of the Levant, and is a sad chapter because what ISIS is doing in the Levant is going to really change, in my view, the future of that region. And most importantly, I think that by not having
But with respect, you're giving me an answer of process, and I'm looking for an answer that is more simply about, in a sense, moral philosophy. I mean, there's a very senior aide, former aide to Tony Blair, called Jonathan Powell, who I'm sure you know, and he's done a lot of work on, quote-unquote, talking to terrorists, because he was very involved with the effort to get the IRA in Northern Ireland to lay down their weapons. And he basically says this, he says, in the end, the greater risk, the real risk lies in not talking. And there isn't, in the end, he says, even when it comes to Islamic State, there isn't really an alternative to talking to the terrorist if you want to end the conflict.
Well, I repeat, the Sunni world and the Sunni leadership, and those who believe the Sunni is a great religion and has much to offer to the world, they should stand up and take their own responsibility. The entire Levant is changing. It's not the same thing as 30 years ago. And I would like to add, you don't have the same situation as then, and history never repeats itself. Let's not copy from what happened 30 years ago, because it's impossible to copy what is different.
No, but people are aware of the work you did, the risks you took, and the achievements you made. I'm now thinking of the perspective of a family, for example. You know, since the terrible murder of James Foley, and you know, the video was released by Islamic State. His parents, John and Diane, have thought aloud about their reaction, and they've said this. They've said, eventually, we are, even in the United States, going to have to negotiate and understand Islamic State. And the US, Diane Foley says, needs to reevaluate its policy about never negotiating with these terrorists.
The Islamic State is to evaluate what they're doing to the future of Islam. And my question to them would be, since they know very well how to use the media, the technology and all the rest, my question is ISIS forcing Islam to commit suicide?
You think that is a long-term possibility, that this could be existentially a threat to to the Muslim world? To
the entire Levant architecture was built, as you and I know and many others know, in 1916. It carries a French and a British name. And then, of course, another British name was that of Gertrude Bell. And the borders, the structure, the architecture of the Levant is a century old, the only region in the world which still has it. And what ISIS is doing is basically raising more questions about a structure which was built at that time. And I think those who are very, very real Muslims and believe in that religion, they better ask themselves, what have we got to do? Or we allowed some people to take actually the entire civilization to a point of no return.
But it seems to me, you know, you're tempted with your diplomatic experience to look at the big picture and the geostrategy. I also want you to look at the much more here and now challenge posed by the kidnap situation we still see unfolding in Syria. What about paying for the freedom of hostages? One has to say, though officially the French government and indeed the Italians have denied it, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence to suggest that, for example, the 4 Frenchmen who were released by Islamic State earlier this year were released because negotiations of some sort had happened and some sort of deal was done. In your view, to save human life is a deal worth doing?
The immediate and short answer is if this is what the family really insists on being, I would really wonder if this is actually okay, because the families, I have families who made contact with me, who are now have relatives taken by ISIS.
You mean the families who are suffering today, who have loved ones who are in captivity in Syria today, have reached out to you?
Yes.
And what have they said to you?
They ask me things which I cannot do, because I don't have the qualifications to deal with ISIS. So my point is...
Well, what did they ask you to do? To get involved?
To free them.
To undertake a mission?
To do something. Yes, it's very, very painful, because not that I know or don't know. They found out of me in different ways. And the question is, the most important question for me is, I think that the leadership of the Sunni movement in the world has got to take on responsibility, as the leadership of the Shia movement took on their responsibilities 30 years ago.
But with respect, that might take years to unfold. But you were put on the spot by families today who believe, with your experience, you could do something for them now to save the lives of their loved ones.
And I can't.
Well, how do you know?
I can't, because I do not have the same relationship I had with the leadership of Shiism as it now is needed with the leadership of Sunnis. The Sunni leadership has got to be responsabilized and look at this straightforward in a very concrete and immediate way, in my view. And that is the only, diplomacy is not just a theory, and negotiation is not a theory. Negotiation theory that you learn in university does not work, because every case is different. Every case is different, you know. Dealing with Saddam was different than dealing with the Ayatollahs and all the rest. And my point is, let's not be theoretical, let's be very practical.
But I'm being practical in saying to you, there is evidence that Islamic State can be reached and can be negotiated with. I point you to the Frenchmen who have been released by the very same people who were holding Foley and Haynes and others who were eventually murdered. So things, it seems, can be done if people are prepared to do them, and if morally and ethically they think it is the right thing to do. You had to make that choice.
Yes, I would first go to Saudi Arabia before going to ISIS. The House of Saud has an incredible track record of the leadership of the Sunni world. So instead of beating around the bush, let's start from that. As I did go to Iran because they were the leadership of Shiism. And that, I think, is the way to start. I don't say that it will be the way to solve. I do not know the way to solve, because, as I said, every day is a different day. But I think we have to be realistic. The entire Levant is changing. It's a new page of history. We cannot repeat what was in the past.
And in the meantime, we see a US-led military coalition once again dropping bombs on Syria and Iraq. Given everything you've said about the state of flux in the Middle East, about the highly complicated diplomacy that in the end leads away from IS to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf and wherever, can bombs and military action destroy Islamic State?
I would not rule them out, but I would first raise another bomb. And that is ISIS on the process of forcing Islam to commit suicide? And I would say this openly and clearly, so that who has a responsibility will take it. Who does not want to take responsibility, the world will know. You do not build a new architecture of the Middle East, of the Levant, from those Europeans who built it a century ago, by proceeding as if this was a war of the last century or before. And if you want to be a player in the world, you take on the responsibility, not just us, not just me as an individual, but also ISIS. And so the question, I think, should be raised in different ways. Negotiations are not a possibility which is in theory. The negotiation, to be negotiation, has to be concrete and real and practical, and not a theory. Too many people speak of negotiation in theory. Well, I'm not interested in the theory of negotiation. I'm interested in the practicality of that negotiation,
I understand.
specifically.
And a final thought, because, you know, let us not forget, you took risks 25 years ago to get men out of captivity.
Yes.
Today, faced with this moral choice as to whether you would countenance money or prisoner releases or any other practical step to try and save the lives who today sit in captivity under IS control, would you do everything possible to get them out?
Let me tell you that the business, the operation that brought to freedom the Western hostages in Lebanon is only one of others I did in my life. I had the good fortune of helping people coming out of captivity from 4 different countries. Not many people know, very few indeed do know. And that is because I believe in man, in humanity. And I did so, and in my life, I really had this good fortune. And every case was profoundly different. Now, in front of this thing that we have with ISIS, I would really put myself in front of those who have a tremendous responsibility and say, forget the theory, what are you going to do? You are, you know, you have a role in the region, you have a role in the world. I think we have to talk and see what we can do, and you have to act. I think every individual has a different life, every individual has a different fate, and I think we cannot just generalize the whole thing. But yes, did I risk my life? Yes. Why did I do it? Because my father taught me how to say thank you.
We must end there. Gian Domenico Pico, thank you for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.